sanctuary, the Greek Orthodox Church is a possibility. Rabbi Michael said that the priest, Pastor Constantine, is interested in doing that. So that is a possibility in September that we can visit the Camarillo Greek Orthodox Church, or we will be having a forum. So those are the two possibilities. Again, look for that at vcic.info. Also, in October 5th, please put on your calendar that we will be having the Feast of Faiths in Newberry Park at the Hindu Temple. It will be vegetarian food. There will be more information coming out that we will be doing this Feast of Faiths for the first time in a Hindu temple. And they will be serving us vegetarian food, and they have a little bit of garment requirements that women have to have their shoulders covered, men too, and that there will be no knees revealed. So even women wear a longer garment, men no shorts. So that type of thing is what we do. We listen to each other, we communicate, we'll have an opportunity to share. I hope that piques your interest in what we do. And I don't want to take any more time from Pastor Benjamin, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. And I am excited. I've been saying this for a couple of months. I'm excited to hear this subject. And the reason I am so excited is it's a personal history, but also seeing what PBS had done. This actually is more education for us, and hopefully opening dialogue. It is so important.
All right, thank you. How's everyone doing tonight?
Good.
Excellent.
Good. My name is Reverend Benjamin Thomas Jr., and I'm the pastor here at Bethel. This is my 6th year being here, finishing up year number 6, being here, and I have my wife here in the back. Thank you for coming. So she's our musical director here, so she's in charge of all the music here during our worship experience. And so we're so happy to have you. Thank you, Tim, for the invite on this subject that is huge. So we're going to try to get to as much as we can in the time given. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. All right? All right. I'm going to just quickly talk about what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the history of Black Christianity. We're going to get into some racial dialogue as well, because that is a big piece of Black Christianity. And then we're going to talk about some struggles, and then we're going to talk about what is the hope for the future in the Black church as well. All right? All right, so thank you all again for coming. All right, so Christianity in Africa before slavery, a lot of times when we talk about Black Christianity, we don't go as far back as Africa, but it actually began in Africa. And Christianity reached Africa in the 1st century AD in Ethiopia and Egypt. And we can find that, for those of you who read the Bible, we can find those things in the New Testament. The Coptic Church in Egypt and Ethiopia, Orthodox traditions are some of the earliest roots of Black Christianity. We also see the rise of African theologians such as Tertullian, who coined the term Trinity, which in the Christian faith is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So that was a big piece there. And then he also wrote the first book on baptism, which we understand and know in the Christian faith is a sign, an outward sign of an inward change in your life. When you make a decision to follow Christ, you are baptized. Okay. Also, we have Origen, who came up with the term systematic theology, which means that theology has a system, a beginning and an end. And so if you are ever lucky enough to go to seminary, they have classes just on systematic theology. You can get a degree in systematic theology. So that was a major piece. And then Augustine, which a lot of people know as a famous theologian, and he discussed the term original sin. And what original sin means is that from the time of Adam and Eve, the moment they messed up and they ate the fruit, they sinned. And so that means that we were born into a life of sin. That's where the term original sin means. Then also the term of grace, which means unmerited favor, which means you're getting blessings that that you shouldn't receive, right? Because you've fallen short, you haven't done all the things that God has called you to do. You haven't been following the Ten Commandments. You've been lying to folk. You've been talking about folk. All those things. But grace is something that God gives us in advance of what we've done. All right. So that's where we begin to see the rise of Christianity and some of the early people in African theology. All right. So before chains were placed on black bodies, there was worship in African villages, drumming in the motherland, and a sense of divine nature, ancestors, and community. So we see the rise of people who are worshiping deities and objects, Amun-Ra, the sun god. They worship water. So we see already some level of respect of a higher being. Okay? And then we'll see that continue on as we get into America. African spirituality honored rhythm, ritual, and relationships, elements that deeply shape Black Christian worship in America. And those things are still important to Black churches today. Rhythm, the sound, the gospel sound, the blues, all of those things came out of the Black church. Ritual, we have a responsibility to worship and serve God, right? And so ritual just means how we serve God. So it's very important to us to continue to lift up the name of Jesus here, and especially in the Black church. Here in our faith, here in the AME tradition, we have a ritual, which means an order of worship in which we follow. So we begin each service with a call and response, which is our call to worship, where we're saying that we're happy to be in church worshiping with each other. And then we then go on into an opening hymn or a song to set the atmosphere for worship. And then we go into our prayer where we thank God for what he has done. And then we'll sing another song. Then we'll go into the scripture reading, followed by our Decalogue, which is the recitation of the Ten Commandments. So Decalogue means 10. And then we also have a thing called the summary of the Decalogue, which is, you're not going to say all 10 Commandments, but you're going to say a summary of what that means. And so that is a reminder of the choice that we make to serve God. All right? When Christianity reached Africa and later the diaspora, it did not erase identity, it infused faith with culture. All right? So as we continue to see slaves as they move on from Africa here to America, you will begin to see a merge in culture and religion. Okay. Next slide. Religion in the fields. So now we're moving from Africa now to the fields of Georgia and Florida and Virginia and Pennsylvania. Okay. The slave trade produced slave owners who used religion as a way of control of the slaves. So we hear there's a thing called the Slave Bible, which was a Bible which had some of the scriptures torn out, right? And they didn't give the slaves the whole Bible, but just parts that they could use to control the narrative, control their thoughts, so that they wouldn't become out of line. So we begin to see Christianity as a weapon instead of something that should be influenced in the culture. African religious practices blended Christianity with their beliefs in the homeland. And early enslaved believers created indivisible institutions such as gathering places, and we see the rise of the Underground Railroad. We see the rise of spirituals. Has anybody heard what a spiritual is? All right, spiritual is a song they used to sing in the fields. An example of that is, go down, Moses, go down to Egypt land, tell O Pharaoh to let my people go, right? And so that is a connection to God. God, help us as we find ourselves in our own slavery, in our own bondage. Come and rescue us from this pain and this anger and this work that we feel, okay? Another one is swing low, sweet chariot. coming forth to carry me home. Right? And so that is a song of remembrance. Lord, I've done all I can do. I can't take no more. And so come and rescue me so that I can see you and be with you and no longer feel this pain. You have any questions so far or comments?
So is Sweet Low, Sweet Chariot a statement about I'm tired of this life, I want to go to the next life?
That's the chariot coming on to carry you home.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about it, day in and day out,
Sure.
you're beaten, you're worked to the bone, and so you're looking for some sort of relief. And as we begin to talk about what does that look like, we began to see slaves identified with the Old Testament in the Bible, especially the book of Exodus, as the Israelites found themselves in their own bondage and slavery to the Egyptians. And so I began to identify and praying to a God that can rescue them from their enslavement. And so now we're going to begin to get to a thought called Send Us the Deliverer. We're going to begin to move to what is called liberation theology. Okay. So it says, Black Christians begin to interpret the gospel and the Bible through the lens of suffering and deliverance, so that they identify with the struggles of working in the field, and they're praying to their Lord. Their songs are reflecting that they need God to come and deliver them from their life. Jesus was not only a symbol of oppression, but was identified as one who specializes in working with the oppressed. And so that's what draws Blacks to the Christian faith, is because they can identify with the struggle of the early church and the early believers. They were oppressed by the system of the Roman government. And so they can identify with being taken advantage of and being beaten and talked about. And so they understood that now they can serve someone who specializes in saving those who are oppressed, liberated.
Pastor Benjamin?
Yeah.
Can you be a little more specific of Jesus as a symbol of oppression? This is a new term to me.
Yeah, so we have to remember that what's going on at the time is that Jesus is really coming to kind of really save the people from themselves. And so that is a symbol of oppression in a way, because you shouldn't have been doing what you were doing in the first place. Jesus wouldn't have to come, we believe in Christian faith, Jesus wouldn't have to come and save us if we were acting right. And so since we've become a slave to sin, he has to come and rescue us from being oppressed from the effects of sin. Because what Christianity we believe in is that sin separates you from Christ. Yeah,
Just a quick question, to go back just a bit. I'm curious, and I was asked this today by, I can't remember who, but somebody asked me, why would the slaves adopt the religion of the masters? Why wouldn't they perpetuate their own religious tradition?
So, what we have to understand is that while being a slave, you are really beaten until you get the old way out of your brain. And so when when the slaves came, what did they do? They gave them new names so they could no longer identify with who they were. And then they separated families, that they were losing their sense of identity and community that they were used to. And so once I separate you and I isolate you, I can do whatever I want. Right? And we see that in governments all over the world now. They separate you, they isolate you, and then they do the damage.
Do you have a sense of how many slaves were Christian before they came to the U.S., or would they practice other religions and then adopt Christianity here?
I would say, there's no exact number, but I would say it was probably a mixture. They probably kept some of their own tradition and their own faith, because they had some idea of a deity.
So not necessarily a Christian
Not
faith.
necessarily Christianity.
Right.
But then as they came over, they were forced into Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
I remember hearing at one point early in the slave trade, when they brought the Africans over, at first, if it was found out that they were Christian, they were actually set free. Is that true?
That's a new one for me.
Okay. But that didn't last very long. That's just what I heard once.
Doesn't mean it's not true,
Okay.
but I haven't heard that one.
I know I'm going to date myself with this reference, but Alex Haley in Roots is referencing that many of the people brought over, their faith tradition was either the multiple deity faith, as you mentioned, or they were Muslim, which I found kind of fascinating. Didn't realize the influence of Islam in Africa at that point also.
That's been very strong.
Interesting.
All right, anybody else? All right, so now we're going to get to the rise and the beginning of the early church. Black churches were created to meet the needs of the people. They were meeting their spiritual needs, their emotional needs, and their psychological needs. Black churches began to be the cradle of many movements. So we talk about the social justice movement that happened during the civil rights movement. All of those things had their beginnings in the black church. We see here in America, the oldest black church is the First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia, which was founded in 1777. Wow. So we see that a long time ago, faith was an integral piece. Yeah?
I don't know whether you can answer this, but they have just excavated in Williamsburg, Virginia, a black church, and I don't know when it was founded. I don't know whether you know anything about that.
I don't, but knowing the area, you talk about
Pastor
Virginia and
Benjamin, can you
those
repeat
places.
the question so everybody can hear it?
Here, let me give you the mic.
Okay, I'm talking about Williamsburg, Virginia, where Colonial Williamsburg has rebuilt, and they're still excavating what we call the main town, and they have excavated a black church, and I'm not sure whether they're planning to rebuild it or not, but anyway, that's what I'm talking about. Can you get me behind the, I just need to get my loud voice going.
And so, but you don't know what year that was?
Yeah, I don't know what year it was, and I was asking if anybody knew.
No, but judging from the location, it's probably could be from the late 1700s to 1800s.
Yeah.
Just given to
Oh, yeah.
that area of the country what was going on.
Google says 1776.
Google always knows. Google or ChatGPT, one of them knows. One of them has the answer.
And it also says that those who attended met in secret because it violated existing laws.
Yeah, it had to meet out in the dark because Master couldn't know that they were worshiping together. Because what did that do? It built community. And it's, when you build a bond with someone, it's hard to break. And so if the slaves continued to worship together, build community together, then they could ultimately plan a rebellion together. And that was the feud. The AME Church, which is the denomination in which you find yourself in tonight, was founded in the year of 1816 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Then we have the AME Zion Church, founded in 1821. The Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, 1870. And the National Baptist Convention in 1895. And so all of these are major black denominations that have their foundings in the time of slavery. We also see the rise of Baptist, Methodist, and Pentecostal expressions in the black community during this time. And so now while you're here, we are AME here, and that means African Methodist Episcopal. And so I want to tell you a little bit about our founders so you kind of know a little bit about us. Richard Allen was born into slavery in 1760 in Delaware. And something that's interesting and crazy, that he was able to buy his own freedom in 1780. And then he became a licensed preacher in the United Methodist Church. He owned property in Philadelphia, and he was a well-known business person. Since he was an ordained minister, they worshiped at St. George, what we would now call United Methodist Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And one Sunday morning, while he and other parishioners were praying, they were told to get up from the altar in the midst of their prayer. And in that happening, they walked out and they created now what is now known as the African Methodist Episcopal Church. They started what was eventually called the Free African Society, which turned into the AME Church. And so the denomination of the church that you're in is the only denomination that was started out of a political protest. And the thing is, we're still in existence in Philadelphia. If you ever go to Philadelphia, you can go to Bethel AME Church. There at the bottom, they have a museum where you can see the tomb of Richard Allen, his wife, and other artifacts from the history of the AME Church, like the first pews. They have all that kind of stuff in there. So if you ever go back and visit Philadelphia, go by Bethel AME Church.
Question.
Yeah.
Are AME churches connected with other Methodists and or Episcopal churches?
So, the short answer to your question is we are connected to other AME churches, and so my ordination, I could go pastor the United Methodist Church if I wanted. So my ordination does transfer.
Because I've heard of, we Jews are completely confused with so many Christian denominations. And, but we've heard of, I know of Methodist and I know of Episcopal. It's only, I think, in AME that I see the two combined.
So Richard Allen loved the form of worship of the Methodist Church, the order. So if you, anytime you go to Methodist Church, you're going to pretty much have the same order of worship. So he enjoyed that. Then he liked the Episcopal style of governance, which means how the bishop who's technically my boss, right? Then they had an order of service. So he mixed the two together to create the AME Church. Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting to me is I grew up as a Methodist in the South, in Atlanta, and our church was known as the Methodist Episcopal Church South. So it's interesting, and I didn't at the time think of, oh, well, there's other Methodist Episcopal Church, but there's an interesting story there, and I don't know what it is.
And it was not a black church.
No.
It's what we now call the United Methodist Church.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we came out of there. Our first preachers were ordained in the United Methodist Church, and then they came over and started Bethel. And then from there, they went from Philadelphia to Maryland to D.C., and so that's how they formed the AME Church. Baltimore, D.C., Philadelphia, and then they moved down to Georgia and all the way down the south. That's kind of how they started. Yeah, Terry?
Little different than the churches. I would like some idea of how it worked, because the Africans were brought over for slavery, whereas Irish or Scottish came over as indentured servants, and they knew they could buy their way out of slavery. I don't understand how Africans who were brought over purposefully as slaves were able to buy their way out of slavery. Can you clarify that?
So the reason depends on what kind of master you had. If you had a master that didn't really agree with slavery, but they had it, they would allow you to purchase your freedom. You could do that. Then we had other owners who, they were gung-ho about it. So they had as many slaves as they wanted, and wouldn't allow them to purchase their freedom. So it really just depended on what owner you had.
Well, a lot of the slaves were trained in a trade. They might be a blacksmith or something like that. and they could earn money. And in fact, some of the owners of the slaves would actually have their slaves go and work for somebody else to make money. But when those slaves learned a trade, it meant it was really possible to get their freedom, and then they would have a way to earn money after they were free.
That didn't happen a lot. Well, I know it did.
What's the Bethel part of Bethel AME?
Just the name they came up with. Bethel means house of God.
It's a
Okay.
physical location.
Yeah, and it's a place where Jacob lies down and has a dream of the ladder going from earth to heaven.
Yeah, but he liked the name house of God. It's both of those.
So it's a combination of the two words.
Cameron, you got a question?
Oh, no, I was just gonna say what you said, absolutely, that's just being.
And then I also know that a lot of people had a question on what does the animal mean here in our picture. And so when Richard Allen started the AME Church, the church started in a blacksmith shop. And so that was the property that he owned. And so you'll see in all of our logos, you'll see the cross and the animal. So that signifies that we came.
So you had said that you would be welcome to speak at an Episcopal church. Would you have that same relationship with the Methodist church?
No, it's the opposite, you know.
Yeah, it's the opposite.
Oh.
Yeah, so I can, my ordination goes to like AME Zion, CME, and United Methodist. I can go to any of those, and pastor. It'll just take my ordination. Episcopalian, I haven't tried, but I'm sure it's probably something I probably could do.
You're always welcome to speak.
Yeah. But I don't know anyone who's tried that.
Reverend, since the civil rights movement, at least, I mean, as I think of it in the sixties, and some freedoms that were made law, has there been any attempts, as a drag word, just any natural of black Methodist Episcopal churches coordinating with white Episcopal Methodist churches? Any kind of coordination going on there?
So to answer your question, yes. So I know that they do have I think it's a World Methodist Council, and they meet every year, so that gets all of them in the same umbrella, in the same place, to have discussions on what's going on in their different denominations. So they do have that, yes.
So you had said that the people that are brought over from Africa were given a highly abridged version of the Bible with certain chapters removed because they apparently didn't want to read those chapters. I'm just curious, are there editions of that version of the Bible available for us to study? And do you happen to know what some of the chapters were that were removed and why?
That I don't know. You might have to ask Google, or maybe somewhere in the library somewhere probably would have a copy. Yes.
Most slaves did not know how to read and write, and so what would happen is when the slaves would go on Sunday morning to be part of on a plantation, they would be, whoever was doing the preaching, it might have even been the person who owned the plantation, they were very, very careful about what they read in the Bible. As far as I know, they never had a Bible that was specifically for black slaves.
Yeah, and so you might have to go to a museum or somewhere to see someone may have a copy.
I don't know where it has the discussion, but I know 50 years ago when I was in school, my friend here, when I grew up in Atlanta too, I was out here and I picked up a book that was laying out in the library, and it was a collection of slave spirituals that someone apparently transcribed or written down. And it really kind of knocked me off my feet, because I never saw such an intense, surpassing identification with Christ, or Jesus of Nazareth, anywhere like that. The depth of faith and trust was complete and total in these goes to your point about the identification of the conditions that we're suffering.
Yeah. And there's still popular songs that people still sing today. And still it invokes a level of emotion when you think about the people who wrote it and the suffering that was going on in that time. Yeah, Reverend Melissa?
Just to answer the previous question, so I guess in 2017, we were starting to talk about full communion with the Episcopal Church in all of the Methodist churches, but that's an ongoing discussion. So anyway, just to answer that question.
So one day we might get it right.
Hopefully. but we can still collaborate.
And I know that on the AME side, they did do a service in Philadelphia at St. George, between Bethel and St. George, to just kind of commemorate the separation of the two churches. And so I know that's something that they do as well in Philadelphia.
The other thing that really was interesting to me, I just found out about 6 months ago that there were many slaves in California. This was a free state, but in fact, if people moved here from other states and they had slaves, they brought them with them. And so there was a church, and I wish I could remember where it was founded, but in Southern California by a black former slave. And there were a number of people who came to that church. So we like to think that it was only in the South, but in fact it was not.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to talk about the fight for justice. Black churches were the main place for the creation of justice work. Groups like the NAACP, the National Urban League, Southern Christian Leadership Conference got their start in the black church. So we're going to begin to see now this move where the black church is going to begin to kind of be the center of everything that happens in the community. So if someone needed help with their schooling, you'll begin to see tutoring. If someone needed help with money, you'll see the benevolence piece. And so that continues to build this level of community. And then we're going to begin to see the rise of a thought called liberation theology. Has anybody heard of liberation theology? Oh, wow. All right. I'm doing good. Liberation theology is a movement that emphasizes social justice for the oppressed and originated in Latin America during the 1960s and 70s, particularly within the Catholic Church. And it emerged as a response to widespread poverty, social inequality, and political oppression in the region. The movement's key figures are Gustavo Gutierrez, Leonardo Boff, and John Sobrino. So we see that in the 60s and 70s, and now in the early 80s, 90s, we're going to begin to see a thought come up called Black liberation theology. And what that thought is it identifies the struggle and the oppression that blacks have had, and it identifies them back with the Israelites in the book of Exodus. And the father of Black liberation theology, his name is Reverend James Cone. And so if you go on Google, they have all kinds of books from James Cone. So many seminaries study his work, and most black churches preach a liberation gospel message. The first term kind of came out really big, I think it was 2008, 2004, when Barack Obama was running for office, and he went to a church called Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. And the pastor, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, preached on the subject that America was oppressing others. And so that took like on a world in the life of its own, where people were beginning to open up their eyes to the thought of Black liberation theology. Right? And so what James Cone said, he believed that the New Testament revealed Jesus as one who identified with those suffering under oppression, the socially marginalized, and the cultural outcast. And we see all throughout the New Testament, the people that Jesus hung out with and dealt with were those who were oppressed, the marginalized, marginalized, the least of those. Right? And that's where the majority of his ministry lies. And so it is an identification of, hey, I can identify because I'm going through the same struggles as they were. Okay? Post-Civil War and expansion with freedmen. So now we're beginning to see moving off of slavery to now starting to get to free those who were free. They're beginning to now take the church and begin to run with it. They're beginning to move out west, out here, and in the Midwest, and continuing to grow the church. Any else have anything you want to add here? We'll move on to the next one.
I mean, I certainly would not count myself very knowledgeable in Christian theology, but what you're describing as liberation theology sounds to me like normative Christian theology, and even I would say in my own Jewish tradition, theology as representing the oppressed and identifying with the underclass and moving toward equality. So is this really just a matter of emphasis?
Yes. Mm-hmm. You hit the nail on the head. Oftentimes we hear the word black liberation theology, we think that it's like this crazy term, but in reality, it's something that we can all identify with.
Mm-hmm. And when you say in the slide that Jesus reveals himself as black, was he arguing about actually the skin tone of Jesus?
James Cone does, yes.
And as black more than sort of standard Mediterranean dark?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. My wife is from Morocco, and she's much darker than I am.
She's much prettier too.
That's what gets people. That's what turns people off on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a piece everybody kind of stops at when people hear someone say, "Oh, Jesus is black," like, hey! That causes some level of concern.
Well, I must admit, I was a little surprised to see how white Jesus is in these portraits. I mean, at least make them Mediterranean, which is probably more historical.
Yeah, and you know what that point goes to again is that slave mentality, right? So the slaves were taught that that's what Jesus looked like, and even now in churches, you still see that representation because that hold is so strong.
And I'm agreeing with my colleague. I've been enjoying the artwork here, the stained glass representation though, that brown-haired, pale-skinned, blue-eyed Jesus is not a person who lived in the Middle East.
Right.
Yeah, exactly, and that is one of the big pieces of why churches are kind of, what does Jesus look like? And so in a lot of black churches, you'll see a black Jesus, and that can be off-putting to people. Because at the end of the day, churches are supposed to be what? Open. And so it opens yourself up to a lot of dialogue and a lot of discussion. Okay, well, why does Jesus, like we're having here, why does Jesus look like this and not this?
And the same way we have the Virgin of Guadalupe, which is a very Latina-looking Mary, which inspires, a lot of emotion and love. So I think there's a desire to identify with God.
All right, so how we worship. Black spirituality is embodied. It moves, it shouts, it weeps, and it dances. All right, so we put an emphasis on being open in the spirit, having singing songs, so you'll hear all kind of notes and things, and that's what helps draws people to the black church. Even if they're just visiting, you always hear, "Hey, I like to sing," right? Or the openness of worship. They like that there really are no rules, right? Just one of our songs says, "So concentrate yourself and worship Him." We put more emphasis on the worship piece because we understand God's goodness and His grace towards us. And in return for Him being kind to us, He is deserving of our praise. Okay? The Black preaching tradition is storytelling, testimony, and thunderous truths. So we hear the preacher uses all kind of things. You might hear a call and response, which is where I will say one thing, and then the crowd will say something else. I might say, can I get an amen? And then folk will be like, hey, amen, right? We've seen that in some of our favorite movies. Or, we might just sing a song that the spirit might be so high we all just hum. It embodies and it takes on a life of its own. And that kind of really goes back to the early African traditions. We did hum, we story told. That's how we passed down oral tradition from generation to generation. We focus on African drumming. So we have a lot of instruments. People see drums, pianos, organs, guitars. All of those things are important pieces of the worship experience, because we believe that worship is supposed to be lively. You're supposed to be excited about worshiping the God in which we're serving.
It's funny, as I look at this slide, I see the Hasidic Jewish approach to worship, which is also very musical, very storytelling, dancing. It's certainly not in other forms of Judaism, but it's very, very similar, I think.
Yeah. The music is a ministry, the worship is warfare, and the shout is survival. So we understand and know that when people come in here on Sundays or whatever day we open up, if it's a Bible study or whatever, that people have been going through a whole lot of stuff all week long. And so they are coming here as a place of rest and revitalization. Right? And so in that, it is important for us to just meet the people where they are. And in doing so, we're then able to minister to the person holistically, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. That's our job.
What do you mean by worship is warfare?
We sing songs that
about struggle.
But we also sing songs of, the song I can think of is the song that we sing here by Charles Jenkins. It says, "This is war." So it means that what we're doing is we've been taught that serving God is a spiritual battle. We're facing, we fight spiritual things that we see that we can't see. That we fight principalities that we can see that we can't see. So when we lift up our hands and when we lift up our song, we're telling the devil that he has no place in here and with us.
Okay.
So the song says that, this means war. I plead the blood, so that means that we're pleading God's protection and guidance over us. Just like at Passover, when the Israelites spread the blood over the doorposts, we're asking God to pass over them and not hurt them. It's the same principle.
The other thing I just can't skip over is how many times in the Hebrew Bible God responds to a shout, to a cry. The slaves, Sodom and Gomorrah. It just goes on and on. It's sort of a continuing theme in the Hebrew Bible where it's the shout of the oppressed that God responds to.
Yeah, and that's why we believe in giving God our very best praise for that exact reason. We always say in the church, when praises go up, blessings come down. And so when we say that, we're understanding that God delights in our worship and our praise to Him. So we want to do stuff that is pleasing to God. Anybody else? All right, the voice of the movement. We know that the Black church is one of the key places in the civil rights movement. We know that many events happened in the church, and then they gathered, they got their direction in the church, and then they went and took it to the streets. All right? One of the main things that we can think of is Bloody Sunday, when they marched over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. They started at an A&E church in Selma, Alabama, where they got their directions. They heard a sermon, they heard worship that energized them for what was to come, the danger that was outside for them, right? When we talk about the holiday that we just celebrated, in Juneteenth, we see that it was a black church that they nailed the announcement to. Another AME church, they nailed the announcement to that yes, slaves are free here in America. And so we see that time and time again, the church is where people got their voice, right? We know that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he was a minister. He cut his teeth in the church. And so we see some of the great singers, Mahalia Jackson, all those people that we like listening to, they all got their start. Aretha Franklin all got their start. Whitney Houston, even though she was a little crazy, all of them got their start in the black church. And so what that does is the black church is really the training ground for whatever you're going to experience in life. Whether you want to learn how to sing, we'll put you in the choir from a baby. You want to learn how to play the instrument, you'll sit there next to the actual person who plays. If you want to preach, we'll teach you how. If you want to lead, we'll teach you those things. And so the church is really an empowerment center for the people in which it serves. And as I said before, the black church's goal is to specialize in holistic ministry, which means meeting the needs, whether you're a baby or whether you're a seasoned saint. We want to make sure that we are meeting your needs spiritually. Then we want to continue to meet the needs of all who come. So one of the great things about the black church is that we're open to everybody. And so what that means is that we don't care what you look like, what you've been through, all that matters is that you showed up to be in God's presence. The black church is one of the most open places that you can go. They'll feed you, they'll do whatever it is as soon as you come in. But we also have seen that could be a flaw as well. When we look at what happened at Emmanuel AME Church in South Carolina, where Dylan Ruth came in, they welcomed him in with open arms. Then he turned around and he murdered all of them in the midst of Bible study. So we can see that it can be a blessing and it can be fatal as well. But in that, we find that we've had strength in our worship together. I remember my home church in Phoenix, right after the shooting at Emmanuel 9 happened. We had people from all faiths come to our church to just say, hey, we're thinking of you and we're praying for you. And even 10 years later, now we're still seeing those same things. It is a movement. People understand that change must come. And the only way that we can achieve change is by working together.
Amen.
The black church creates a space for lament, which means that you're crying out. And it also has space for laughter. It is both a Holy Ghost fire and a soulful peace. It gives us permission to cry, dance, be mad, rest, rejoice, all at the same time and in the same space. So let's talk about some of the struggles of the black church. We have a lot of benefits, but some of the struggles that we're facing is that now we're living in a climate that is highly filled with hate and bigotry. We see time and time again someone going into a black church and shooting it up. We've seen people in the community be injured and hurt. And so the more and the hyper the people are about race in America, automatically presents problems. The church has to be aware of all the things that are going on in the community in which they serve. And so that's why it's important for all the churches to know their community and have a voice and be open so that they will know what struggles are going on. Then another struggle is that people no longer identify with the struggle. They feel like they've already made it. And so what do I need this for? They're always talking about oppression and healing and deliverance and all these things. I've already moved past that. So that I no longer identify with that message. And so they will stop coming to church. Then not being able to identify with the younger generation. We see that in church as a whole across the board. we're no longer the voice of the people and of the time. We see that especially now. Social justice issues happen now. The kids are out in the street, young people are out in the street, and the church is at home. And so people feel that the church no longer reflects their visions and their values. Any comments on that? All right, so what's the hope? We talked about the bad, what's the hope? Today, the Black church is global. You can find a church any and everywhere. It's in traditional churches, house churches, hip-hop theology, street liturgy, and social justice spaces. The Black church has had a huge mark on life in America. And it's carried by pastors, poets, professors, and protesters. So it has room for everybody, and has space to grow. And so that's our hope. And if we keep praying, we keep on believing, we keep on trusting, God will enlarge our territory. The last page just has some resources of things that I use to put this presentation together. So does anyone have any questions as we begin?
One slide before the phrase hip-hop theology, I'm looking for the elevator speech definition of that.
So it is the infusion of rap and theology of Christ. So they're able to put the message of Christ in rap music.
Nice.
That's what people listen to. That's what the younger people listen to. So they're able to meet the needs of the people what they listen to.
My parents didn't understand Led Zeppelin, so I figure it goes around, comes around.
Yeah, you're right. Same thing. Same principle applies. Yes.
I would argue about the rise of bigotry. I was born in 1940 in Virginia, and I know bigotry. You'd go to a public restroom and it said white, and then it said colored. So I know bigotry firsthand. And in the 11th grade, I stood up in my white high school class, I think it was a civics class, and said, I believe in integration, and if there'd been a tree and a rope, they'd have tried to hang me. I know bigotry, and I would argue that bigotry isn't any worse now than it was when I was young in Virginia. And it was, if anything, worse in the deeper South.
I would say, to your point, I can see that. But I would also say today, racism is also more out in the open. And so back in the South, where they would maybe have a sheet on, you wouldn't know who they are. Now you very clearly know who you're operating with. We see racism still in our schools. I'm a product of going to an HBCU, so I've seen that. I think I just saw a news article that my school that I went to has been held back by like $1 billion from the Department of Education, the state of Louisiana, for education. That should have went to the school, but it might have went to another school. I won't call the name. I went to Southern. I won't say right, but to LSU.
Sorry.
No, you know. But to LSU and other state institutions. And so that was money that should have been earmarked for Southern. So now they're behind. They can't hire staff. They can't hire teachers. They can't get better curriculum, all because they aren't receiving that money. And so that happens. That's happening in every HBCU across the country. Even in high schools today, we're not pushing HBCUs. We're not pushing JUCO, junior college. We're not pushing any of those things. We're not pushing diversity. We're not pushing people to identify with community and continue to love each other and love thy neighbor as thyself, as we know the Ten Commandments tells us. So it's there, it's still there, just in a different form.
No, it's there. If you saw our president yesterday compliment a president from Liberia for speaking wonderful English when English is his natural language, and complimenting a black, I don't know if she was a secretary or assistant, whatever, on how beautiful she was. And just, it's just kind of
almost reverse bigotry, but it's still, you know,
Yeah, it's still there.
still there, very out there.
And I would comment that in the day, Percy, you were talking about, people were racist and it was just understood. We went through 30, 40, 50 years where it was understood that it's not okay to be openly racist in polite society. And I would say in the last 10 or 15 years, it is now becoming okay to be racist, to be anti-Semitic, to be Islamophobic, to be homophobic. And it's just, you know, that's my opinion and I'm proud of it. Whereas, you know, they may have had the same opinion 20 years ago, but they couldn't state it in polite society, and you wouldn't have
Well, it's
conventional
there, it's just
politicians embracing it.
And it wouldn't be celebrated.
And it wouldn't be celebrated.
I would like to make another statement, which is off the subject. I'm a Quaker, and we worship in silence. And I'm so enjoying the way you worship, which is so different from the way I worship. And you know what doesn't really make any difference? It's what's in your heart and your actions in society that are important. But I was particularly enjoying this and thinking of my Quaker meeting when we have an hour of silence. Well, now that you brought up that, did the Quakers or the Puritans own slaves? I can answer that. Thank you. The first, Quakerism started in about 1650, and so William Penn was a Quaker, and he opened up what we now know as Pennsylvania and invited everybody to come for religious freedom. But William Penn owned 7 slaves. Okay. And he made peace with the Native Americans, and where he built his home, one of the tribes objected. That is our property, so he paid them. And a little bit later, another Native American chief came and objected. Was our property, he paid them too. So there were wonderful things about William Penn. But there were Quakers who owned slaves, and then you would find that sometimes there would be a person in the society who was really against slavery, and then people started thinking, you know, maybe it's not a good idea to have slaves. And my ancestor Elias Hicks, I forget the exact date, but roughly well, it was before slaves were freed. He bought a slave in order to free him, and then he gave him a job, left him something in his will. And there were a lot of people in the Underground Railroad who were really anti-slavery. But some of the early Quakers definitely did own slaves. They would be in the mostly in the northern part of the country, of what we know today as our country.
All right, thank you for that.
Just to clarify, I think you mentioned this, but everyone is welcome to Sunday services and.
Come on down.
Okay, no matter how pale.
Yeah, no matter, we'll take it. Come on.
I'd like to go after Betty. She's had her hand up, but I don't
Okay. I just wanted to say 2 things. One is, I was active in the civil rights movement in the 60s. And of course, we thought we had done great things, and I've lived long enough to discover that it didn't last very long. But I remember that one evening we were planning some sort of an action or other, and this young woman was in our group from New York State, and she said, and we all kind of blew us out of the water, she said, you know, I think I like it better down here, because down here, I know what the rules are. When I go back to New York, they'll tell me what the rules are, but they really aren't. And the reason that I am no longer a Methodist is because my white Methodist church in Atlanta, Georgia, who taught me as a child growing up about how Jesus loved everyone, including black and yellow, red and white, if you ever sang that song. And then I got to a certain age, the minister preached a dynamic sermon denouncing racism. And 3 of the prominent members of that church stood up and said, those people are different, we don't want them here. I could not be in a church that said that. And that's why I'm no longer a Methodist.
Yeah, so those
Well,
things
I've
happen.
got to tell you all one thing. I'm first, and next to Virginia, New York was the biggest slave-owning state. And so sometimes when the Northerners turn their noses up at the Southerners, I have to tell them that.
Okay,
So
we
I
gotta
wanted
bring-
to make a comment on just a couple of things. Oh, and Percy, I think that was Chief Tammany that William Penn made the deal with, one of them.
There were two, yeah.
Yeah,
there were
one of
two.
them, I think was Chief Tammany.
Okay.
Now, the one comment that I wanted to make going back on our white Jesus, according to a radio show I listened to many years ago by Atheists United, before Rome adopted Christianity, it was considered a violation of the first commandment to have an image of Jesus, being that Jesus is considered God. When Rome adopted Christianity, that went out the window, and they controlled the image of God for, close to 2,000 years. The reason why Jesus is white today is because he was a typical Roman back in the beginning of the Rome adopting Christianity as the official religion. Now, the other thing I wanted to comment on is that I would like to suggest that everybody get a chance to watch the documentary Shared Legacies. It's a recent documentary, and it is about how Dr. Martin Luther King had a number of prominent rabbis with him all the time because they recognized the suffering and oppression of the blacks as something that they had gone through themselves. I've seen this. This is a fantastic
Abraham
documentary.
Joshua Heschel was walking
Yes,
next
yes, that's
to
one of the names that I
Martin Luther
remember.
King.
But it's
And in the movie about Bloody Sunday, he disappeared. And it's one of the things I think I find very painful is that the alignment between Jews and people who are
Very key
interested
to
in
civilization.
eliminating racism has really been strained in
Yeah,
recent years.
But the documentary is called Shared Legacies. Great.
And that's something that needs to be addressed as well. Because the Jews were very big in the civil rights movement. And then
Very much.
unfortunately, what people like to do sometimes is change the narrative to fit their motives. And if America is gonna 100% really begin to deal with their racial issues, everybody has to be open about what happened.
I've noticed that we refer to the black church. Much of the discussion tonight and how that's a bad thing. We should be together. Do you welcome non-black members?
Yeah, I welcome everybody. Everybody is welcome.
All are welcome.
Point being, are there many non-blacks in the church? And is there undercurrent of this is the black church?
So you're talking about here or just in
No,
general?
I'm generally asking.
So yes, there are many other nationalities that are involved in the black church. Now, we kind of hit some of these things that we've kind of talked about, is that the black church also has its own struggles with racial issues. And so it's not uncommon to hear preachers preach a very racial laced sermon that can be off-putting. And so that's still part of the evolution of the black church as well.
You mean a white or another pastor preaching a?
No.
You mean a black?
Yes. You will hear, down with everyone that don't look like them. You will hear those sermons. And so it's unfortunate. It means that people still have a long way to go. When we look at the AME Church, part of the issue that we kind of struggle with, we do have members of other nationalities, but as they see in our name, African, that automatically makes people stop. Now, I understand that's just kind of the history.
And one of the things I always focus on is I was a physicist before being a rabbi, so I'm a scientist. In our DNA is tribal. We evolved over thousands of years, and this is my tribe, that's your tribe, and you know, we don't look alike, we don't speak the same language, and I want to get, you know, your land, your animals, your goods and things. And I think the essential teaching of the Hebrew Bible is that we're all in the same tribe, because we're all created in God's image. And you know, it's a very interesting question. If you and I, and you know, and you and I, if we're all created in God's image, what does that say about God's image? I mean, that's sort of an interesting mystical question, that it can be all of the above. But I think the revolutionary idea in the Hebrew Bible is that we're all in the same tribe, and we have to make peace with it.
We're all made in God's image, just like this.
I just wanted to say really quickly that I've worshipped a couple of times. Have never worshipped with you, but I've worshipped a couple of times in an African American church, and two things stand out. One being, of course, the worship is just incredible. And the other thing that stands out is the degree of warmth with which I was welcomed. And I was wondering, you know, there were one or two white people in the church, but they, the people were so warm and welcoming to me that will be something that I will always remember.
And I love the Hebrew, amen.
There you go.
And it is so.
Famous writer Anne Lamott in Northern California was changed. Her life was radically changed because of a black church, and she didn't even go into the church to begin with. She stood outside to hear the music and to hear that worship, and she eventually came in, and they took her into the fold, and her whole life was transformed.
Is that Marin City?
Because of that, huh?
Was that Marin City?
That was Marin City, and that Anne Lamott, Traveling Mercies. Amazing story.
Yeah, we do that.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Thank you all for coming tonight.
Can I say a last word? I actually really want to say you are a very patient man. You let my family come in here and disrupt your talk and go off on our own tangents, and your heart was very patient. But I also want to say this is what Interfaith is about. It is about building bridges and bringing dialogue and understanding. And we really do appreciate you opening your house to us. Maybe we should come in and have a worship with you sometime.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.